Good evening. After 7 years at the helm of Kampala Capital City Authority as Executive Director, Jennifer Musisi is on her way out. The authority under the leadership of Jennifer Musisi has tangible results that have been achieved, most notably in the road infrastructure. But the much promised mass public transport system is still a dream. Critics say what we have achieved has come at a higher cost of borrowed money. There's also animosity between the political class and the technical class at City Hall. To discuss all this, I have Professor Gerard Kareja and Mr. Robert Kirunda. Mr. Robert Kirunda and Professor Gerard Kareja, welcome to the show. You are on the spot tonight.
Thank you, Patrick.
Let me begin with you, Professor Gerard Kareja, because I understand you have followed the pertinent issues at KCCA at a closer range, because you had an interest when you were doing your doctorate. Is that right?
And I just wrote a paper a few years ago when KCCA was formed, and
yes,
I was looking at the organizational puzzles.
Yes. What does this surprise you, that somebody getting a fat salary, was getting money coming from the World Bank, infrastructure developments we have seen for Kampala, there's some great change, and quite a number of people maybe are happy with what has happened. And of course, the political fights are there. Did it surprise you to see Jennifer Musisi throw in the towel?
I would say that the explanation may not have surprised me, but her behavior predicted this, because I think she has mentioned it earlier that if she knew that this job was such like this, maybe she wouldn't have taken it up. But you alluded to the paper I wrote with a colleague about 5 years ago, and our main argument was that you cannot increase autonomy and discretion by having an executive director, and at the same time increase control and steering from the center by having a minister, and then have a board, what would naturally be called a board of directors or board of governors, which is the Lord Mayor and his team, highly political. And then you have this executive director who has to, follow the strategies by the council, follow the strategies by the central government, and then also those ones that have been technically involved by the strategic plan. So it creates some structural issues, and unless they are ever sorted out. In 1887, Woodrow Wilson, who was an American president and a public administration student, talked about the political administrative nexus or dichotomy. So usually when there is no clear negotiation by law on how the two interface, you are likely to have such things occur.
How do we again see that the 7-year journey of Jennifer Musisi, she has left some kind of a footprint that is tangible, that things we can see, and for those who are driving around Kampala, you can say, yes, this happened, the other happened, and after 7 years, was she just soldiering on?
Well, I think that she had privileges and opportunities that allowed her to do what she would like, what she had to do. She had a relatively good budget. She had a certain level of autonomy. Initially, she had explicit political support from the center. And of course, given her experience and exposure, her person, her leadership style, and the team that she put in place, there's what we call administrative efficiency. I think she was doing very well in the area of administrative efficiency. Where she found herself a little bit challenged is that, when you're handling public offices, you are balancing policy activism and administrative efficiency.
You seem to suggest that initially she got political support, she got the money, and and the efficiency was there. Was the money and the political support withdrawn? Is that what you're thinking?
I want to take her statements at their value, at their face value, but also as an observer. Just look at two aspects. You have the mayor and his team who are expressing the will of the people, and you have all the other mayors of the lower level also doing the same, and none of them is a member of the ruling party. Then you have two ministers who are political appointees who are expressing the will of the people as manifested through the president, which is another political party. The two definitely will be in conflict and create tension. So however much political acuity you have, navigating those waters is not an easy task, structurally.
Robert Kironda,
Yes.
could this have been a problem in the law that created Kampala Capital City Authority? That at the end of the day, there would be some clash. At the end of the day, you can only survive if the political class or the ruling or the appointing authority is in good books with you. If it's not, then perhaps you cannot move much.
So there's 2 points there. One is whether it is a problem in the law,
Yes.
and two is if you can survive in spite of that problem. There is the school of thought that it certainly is a problem with the law, the way the law is written, and I subscribe to that school of thought. And the argument on that school of thought, or in that school of thought, is that the original authority that was envisaged in the original bill did not have a political class. It was an authority like UCC, UNRA, and all these ones that we are now going to see government disband and so on. The moment you brought a political class into the legal framework and then left the office of the minister with what I call a bypass power, because if the authority, the political wing and the technical wing are not talking to each other, the minister can override both. That's my reading of the statute. Then you created a real aporia, an irreconcilable situation, where if you have two strong-willed people, and in my view it doesn't have to be the protagonists of the current story. If Professor Karieja and I got into office and either we subscribe to different management theory or style, or we come from different political contexts, or whatever the things that put us on irreconcilable paths are, you will possibly see the same situation. Now, I think, firstly, that one has to go back and look at the law, because when you ask people directly who is the head of Kampala, some say the Lord Mayor, then you say, well, is it the chief executive? Because the law defines the Lord Mayor as the political head, which is correct, and His Worship the Lord Mayor is right on that, 100%. Also, if you look at the structures, the technical wing accounts to the political wing, which is also okay, which I believe is what Professor Karieja just described as the board of directors. So you have that oversight role, which is absolutely important in the public sector. But then you have the same law saying the executive director is the chief executive of the city and the accounting officer. So you come to a simple analysis of, if this was a ministry in government, what would the hierarchy be? Thank God we have a professor of management, he will guide me. You have the political head who is a minister, you have the accounting officer who is the PS, you have the undersecretary who I believe deals with a lot of administration and human resource issues and so on. There's no contest because you have no linear. I think that whichever interpretations that either were given to the law or that some of us would give to the law was a starting point. Does that mean that notwithstanding, people can't work together? I think that now comes down to styles of leadership, individuals, and perhaps the interests behind those. Now, if you were, and to be fair to Madame Jennifer Musisi, if you go out of your way and you believe that you are doing the best for the city, and your appointing authority comes and says, no, you are the problem, there's only so much you can do. I have expressed views elsewhere to say I sincerely doubt that anyone less willed than her would have achieved what she has, especially in the first 4 years of her tenure, because it took real guts to change this city. There are some showdowns I watched and said, this is going to be fun. One of the ones that comes to mind carefully was the one between her and General David Nyefuza over that property somewhere, I think, on Senziwa Road. And we all said, let's see how this ends. Who blinks first? And she didn't relent. And then the time for demolitions ended. And then came the 2016 election. And naturally, even the mightiest of us will take those sentiments into consideration. So I think one has to look at, okay, is there ever going to be, and were I to analyze, I would go back and say between 96 and today, what has NRM's performance in Kampala been? Because even before her, the politics of Kampala was always contested. Will it change only because she's left? I sincerely doubt that. I think it will take a lot more than that. And that's not a legal problem. That's a political problem.
Professor Karija, on a management problem, because Uganda, we seem to be doing well when it comes to policy proposals and formulation and stuff like that. We have always been weak at implementing some of the things. Here we have an executive director who seems to be really implementing what she's intended to do, and all of a sudden she's throwing in a towel. I mean, we've got to, and isn't it going to be very difficult for somebody to step in the shoes of Jennifer Musisi? Because you'll find all the conflicts there at City Hall between the elected leaders in town, the appointing authority, and whatever political inclination you belong to.
Yeah, I think that, personally, I think Jennifer Musisi has done quite well as an executive director of a public agency by any standards. And it's possible that it may be difficult for somebody to step in her shoes, but also it's also possible that somebody can take it a notch higher, depending on who that person is, the will that they have, the experience that they have, and the exposure that they have. But you see, the other challenge, the other structural challenge that I observe, both in the act and in practice, maybe more in practice than in the act, because since there's a lawyer here, I wouldn't want to go into those territory. But look at this. The primacy of local governments is self-determination. Freedom from the center and freedom to self-determination. Now, the primacy of an agency is managerial autonomy. The ability to be given the resources that you have, that you need. And I think the outgoing executive director has said that there have been shortfalls in what she expected to be given. And then when you're given that, you use your managerial discretion to do what you want to do and then account. Now, you have people at City Hall who are believing in freedom from the center and freedom to self-determination. Those are the politicians, the elected officials. And the council of Kampala is a bit different. It also has professionals. So it is not like an LC5 council. The KCCA it's a hybrid of a board, but it is not. And then you have the executive director who wants to follow managerial principles and meet targets that were set in the strategic plan. Now, you should also remember that she's answerable to the council, structurally, what they call the authority. But the distribution of power in the act is so fluid, but it also strengthens control from the center. When you create an agency, it should have a certain level of leverage where it ends. But the law clearly stipulates that any decision can be, I don't remember the exact word, but it can be quashed, it can be overruled, the minister takes the last word. It also requires the mayor to be answerable to the minister. But it doesn't it's not clear that reporting relationship. And I'm not very sure whether the Lord Mayor has been actually reporting to the minister. So Just look at it from a simple political agenda. The Lord Mayor had his manifesto, which brought him to the council. The president and his party had their manifesto, which brought them into power. To what extent is the manifesto of the Lord Mayor and his team consistent to the manifesto of NRM? If there is a variance, then you as the executive director, you will be torn apart when priorities are being set, when allocation of resources is being debated, when expectations are being pushed on you. So that multiplicity of power centers and authorities above you, and remember, much as the minister and the Lord Mayor have oversight on the executive director, they do not have power to appoint or fire her.
Okay,
It's the presidency.
Mr. Robert Kirunda, would you suspect that this law was created to politically subdue Kampala or even capture it? Because on the ballot box, they can never do that.
First of all, never say never. That's a lesson I have learned over the years. Stranger things have happened. If you have watched Uganda's politics, you see the campaigns every season and they say, Kuruna again. Huh? When the election day comes, my good friend, Professor Ramadan Gobi of MUBS, one time told us, for him he decided that he's not going to engage in a political debate about elections again. Why? Because in much in the way he lives, he would hear people swear. So in the last election, he decided, you know, I am going to go and be a polling agent and watch this thing properly. And he told people, you come and vote. Then he would look at people, the same people who had been making noise. They came, they voted. At the point of tallying, he was there. When they began to count, the sentiment he had witnessed over the first 4.5 years, and what he was saying on the ballot paper, were not communicating to each other. He said, man, I want to be matching German. So never say never. But to come back to your point, was it the intention of the framers of the law to take over Kampala? I think that the law would have been written in more extreme terms. I believe that it is possible, and I'm not saying it was the case, but it is possible that the drafters of that law either did not cast a glance and see down the road exactly how much confusion those 3 power centers would cause, because it is a real problem. The Lord Mayor, the ED, and you have to understand that the Lord Mayor, of course, will move for political expediency, while at the same time he must ensure, or the council, or the authority must ensure, that the technical wing does not default on their obligations. The ED is saying, like Professor correctly said, that look, I have a technical duty. If a road has to be built according to spec, the road has to be built according to spec. If garbage isn't being collected in the city, that's not a political problem. That's a technical problem first, before it becomes a political problem. So she has to say, garbage has to be collected. It has to be collected on time. I think one of the achievements that perhaps I have found myself reflecting more and more on is to think about just how many people does City Hall employ, actually. I'd never thought about it until she threw a number at us once. And now she said that number is 7,000 and we need more. That's not a political issue. That's a technical issue. Because when we are driving our cars in the morning and we see those ladies sweeping the street, at least I care enough to try and make sure, even when I'm in a hurry, I don't make them feel that I might knock them, because they matter. But that's because someone has enabled them to have that identity, to wake up in the morning and go in the cold and sweep that street. That's a duty. Now, when you come from that perspective, you need to have what I believe Professor was alluding to, which is autonomy, to make the decisions that can move the technical agenda forward without getting stuck between 2 conflicting manifestos. Now, how you do that, whether it is political expediency or it is... And there's another issue, Patrick, that I think we should not forget. The KCCA that her successor will inherit is fundamentally different from the one she took over. The previous KCCA, where she came and said in Parliament, when she was justifying her salary at the beginning, that look, there was so much money flooding these corridors. I think in her resignation, she cites that there were as many as maybe 151 accounts, which have been collapsed to 9 accounts. How do you even watch 151 accounts spread across 5 divisions? How? So as to meaningfully. So she says, no, I came in, I collapsed these accounts, and we said, let's collect revenue digitally. So now at least there might be corruption. I don't think KCCA is free of corruption. But technically speaking, you can look and say there's a measure here, let's go and verify. Is there logic in these numbers? This here can very easily become a political problem if it is not solved.
But can we really...
So there's that tension,
Professor
and it's real.
I know we may have credited her because that she's done a good job, but can we really give her that credit? Because she got a lot of money, and most of the money was, I think, a loan from the World Bank, right? So if we have not used our own money, generated in our own city through taxes and other ways, but you have been given a loan or a grant, can we really say we have achieved?
Yes, because whenever a budget is being prepared, or when it has been read out, I'm aware of those who are looking at where government is going to spend, and they are ready to have a pie, a piece of the pie, in terms of offering the services and earning the money, but others also wouldn't mind getting it without offering the service. I do not think that she was free from those who wanted to get even that donor money without doing anything about it. Call it corruption, call it people wanted to steal. So I think that she created a certain level of, well, at least as far as the public is concerned, we've not had anything from IGG and Auditor General that is of such a magnitude than like we've seen, say, the OPM scandal and others. So as of now, one can comfortably say that she has tried to immunize the agency against those that would like to profiteer unfairly. So to me, if the whole country is borrowing, and a good percent of what we are doing is on borrowed money, including the Nile Bridge that we've just commissioned, I wouldn't consider that she didn't perform because the money was borrowed. My concern would be, did we get value for money for that borrowed money? And as of now, it seems we did, because, I mean, we are seeing the streets lit. I live in a sub-optimal place called Busega. The tarmac has almost reached my place. At one point, we never thought that would happen. So I think to a large extent, she has also demonstrated that whether the money is borrowed or not,
there are those who think, Professor Kariji, there are those who think that there was colossal sums of money injected in KCCA, almost $500 billion, that could have done much more than the 50 meters we see on Kitante Road and Makerere Road and a few traffic lights.
It's possible, and I think that we are not short in this country agencies that can verify that. The road mayor has called for an audit. I believe the Auditor General goes to audit KCCA. Those who think that there is gross misuse of resources can as well commission any other kind of forensic audit. I don't doubt that we have agencies in this country, if they are commissioned to find out, that they would do so. But my personal hunch is that there is increased, at least appearance, of administrative efficiency in the management of city affairs than ever before, at least for the time I've been there as a resident.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'll be asking, because in the next 1 year, perhaps we're getting into a political contestation for power. Isn't that even more dangerous for Kampala? Because you may not do much, since you want also to win some political capital in the city. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amar. My guests tonight are Professor Jared Gareja and Mr. Robert Kirunda. Robert, we are about to enter another political hot season because just in 2019 is around the corner and 2020 will be real politicking.
Season, yes.
So are we not likely now actually to degenerate as a city, not get somebody who can effectively work because you have to get somebody, I suppose, who will be playing the politics instead of the right policies?
You know, it has been said that the lawyer's only correct answer is it depends. And in this case, I have to say it depends.
Oh, come on.
On two things. One, the individual. If you, I mean, I have foreseen maybe three scenarios. If you pick an individual who is friends with His Worship, the Lord Mayor Elias Lukwago, maybe they'll get along. If you pick someone whom they will never see eye to eye with, they will lock horns. Who knows? Two, it depends on whether the president, and this is where reading Dr. Musisi's letter, I think she makes
Can
an
they just
excellent
be
point.
allies for the sake of Kampala, even if they do not belong with the same political
Yeah,
vibe?
but it goes back to what Professor Kareji said earlier. The Lord Mayor has a constituency in the range of 200,000 to 250,000 people he must account to. He superintends over an authority of maybe 40 councillors, or 38 thereabout. I think they're about 40. But each of these has to go and justify to their voters. And remember, away from the authority at the center, you have urban councils, which are also elected. Now, whatever the Lord Mayor does at the center, or whatever the authority, let's not personalize this, whatever the authority does at the center is going to affect the politics here. It certainly doesn't help to have, I saw the story on my way here on NTV, where NRM leaders are saying, by the way, if in 3 days the president doesn't, we are going to. That has nothing with City Hall, but you can see it's a real political issue. And if I was to hazard a guess, I would say it is going to get worse. So we now must pick, what do we want as a country? A city we can be proud of, because that's going to come at a cost. Or we deal with the politicking, and we know that, you know what, Kampala has become a political, I don't know what word the Honorable Mbide would use in that context. You see where I'm going. But it really is a choice that we have to make consciously. And to know that whether it is Dr. Musisi or His Worship Elias Lukwago, until you answer that question, what kind of city do we as Ugandans want? What kind of city does the appointing authority, in this case the president, want to see? Because you can come and say you haven't done enough. And then I'll tell you, you haven't given me enough money to build roads. Checkmate. So it will more likely get worse than
initially,
not.
when they talked of the strategic plan,
Yes.
Professor Kareja, they talked of efficient public transport system. They talked of cable cars. They talked of so many things. The railway system.
Yes,
All these
light
things have
rail.
not been achieved at all. Perhaps somebody in her mind is looking at what you're supposed to have achieved in the strategic plan. And by the way, if you look at the strategic plan, they are not anywhere near to what they envisioned they could do.
Yeah, and that tells you about the supervisor of the chief executive, the ED, the accounting officer. That supervisor should tell us what their assessment is of her. And you know, that's why again it becomes challenging, because when your oversight is largely political, policy activism, maybe the idea of policy activism means that you are highly responsive to public opinion. If the public says you want cable cars, that's what you go for. So an ideal situation is when you have high policy activism and high administrative efficiency. But the reality is in between there. Sometimes you have high administrative efficiency and then very low or limited policy activism. I think one of the accusations observers are giving to Jennifer Musisi, that maybe she was not so responsive to the underclass and so on and so forth. Those accusations have come up, and maybe they could be true. So, but in the ideal situation, you should be able to balance the two. Now, going back to your quest, so that, and as long as that delicate balance is not there, then you can't have your strategic plan met. among other things. Two, there could also be other reasons, inefficiencies and so on. She could have, in my view, actually she focused more on internal organization than the environment. That is why the environment was largely in turmoil until of recent. Maybe some of the engagements with the Lord Mayor and the engagements with the ministers was in a fashion, and even Parliament, was in a fashion that others would have preferred not to go into. So, if you are a technocrat, you may not necessarily have to be involved in political theater, because political theater is for the politicians. Then the technocrats, you pray within your bureaucratic theater. What do I mean here is that I think at a certain point, as she tried to navigate all these political issues, she found herself having an identity of a chief executive that has a quasi-political role in running Kampala. And it's from the pressures from the appointing authority or how you read him, the pressures from the minister or what they direct, and the pressures from the council. These are three major points of political influence and exertion on the chief executive. So yes, there are very many things that in their strategic plan that they may have not met. We also need her to account for that. Why? But you see, she has tried to preempt that you never gave me support, you never gave me money. Actually, one can actually also suggest that she's somebody who is maybe good at reading the Times. Instead of, she pulled the rug. She could have been fired. She could have become unpopular. So it was, at a timing where she's now comfortably smiling. When I saw the road mayor singing, I had different views from him.
Like what?
Like he was giving an impression that he has vanquished Musisi. Maybe it's the other way around.
But talking about reading the Times, if we go back, maybe it is so true, because Madam Jennifer Musisi at one time used to work with Uganda Revenue Authority. And I'm told when everything is working well and fine, and she decided to throw in the towel and resign. Wanted to do her baking business, and she's appointed executive director of Kampala. Everything is working well and fine, and she moves on. Because anticipating maybe things, maybe probably the boat might capsize, but not with her.
Actually, we don't know the heat that is in the kitchen,
Yeah.
but at least to the public eye, the fights, the public fights had kind of gone down.
Yeah.
Between the three parties, the ministry, the authority, and the chief executive.
Robert, we need an efficient public transport system. And I always thought that perhaps the chief executive or the mayor, that will be the first thing to work on. I know she attempted to say, maybe let us use the train to bring people from Buyo Gerede up to the city center. And I was wondering, when they come to the city center in the morning, because they've been using it, when they reach the city center, if you brought 10,000 people or 5,000 people up the railway station in Kampala, what is the method to evacuate people from there to their different destinations, because they're not stopping there?
So you started the analysis of what does Kampala's infrastructure actually look like. And this is where I think that a fair assessment should start. What does it look like today? What did it look like 7 years ago? In my life as a practitioner of the law, I advised a client who attempted to do a bus transport system, or the firm I used to work for advised a client who attempted to do a bus transport system. My friend, the politics around Kampala's transport is real. That I can tell you from experience. Remember that you had, first of all, to deal with roads that were in a very bad shape. With roads, you have a drainage problem. With drainage and roads, you have a weather situation and so on. You have a planning problem. Now, sort that out, improve the roads. Then now start to deal with taxis and borders. And I think that has been a major hot button in the city and will remain a hot button for various reasons. Then when you get to that point, you now say, okay, where do we build the light rail network? Because what other cities have done is, instead of having that green strip in the middle of the roads, remove that, put your light rail there such that cars and trains can coexist. It's a possibility. Do you use the old train network that we have in the city today, for instance, Mukwano roundabout and that whole network and so on and so forth, which is what they're doing now. You can't get to the point of building a light rail network until you answer some of these underlying issues. To answer those underlying issues, you find yourself straight back to the conundrum of the politics. Because when you touch the taxis, the president says, "Awo muawache." When you touch the border people, "Oh, no, those are my voters." What do you do? Because you have to balance, do I raise revenue from them, which is I organize and register them first, then I tax them, then I say, okay, here is how you'll operate, and so on and so forth. In what sequence do you do those things? If you try and do it all at a go, you end up with standoffs. And I think that 7 years in this context is both a short and long time. It is long if you're sitting back and saying, you promised us light rail in all of 7 years. It is short if you spend 6 months negotiating with Utoda. And then, while you're still doing that, you have to go and figure out, Usafi, who actually owns this market? That becomes now another issue altogether. And then you come back and say, aha, so I can't build all of this until I sort out my issues with the Mukono local government, because it seems that my network is going to start there, and then come and say, Ministry of Works, where do our mandates overlap within the law? So there are real issues there. Now, I don't know how she was able to do all of this in her 24 hours, but you can see where I'm coming from. That balancing the central government interests, local government says, we hear you, but now you also know we have to procure a consultant. Then after the consultant takes 2 years to design this thing, say, hey, but no, let us first finish the flyover, then we do the train network. So which came first? The chicken or the egg? No. What we do is let us first talk to UNRA. Because UNRA and Works have been working in the same sector, but to my understanding, and I could be wrong, differently. Because UNRA was supposed to improve the efficiencies of the Ministry of Works. Now we're going to see UNRA go back to Ministry of Works, which is an interesting situation. But you see where I'm coming from. That UNRA is saying, for us, we want to build the flyover. You wanted train network. Okay, which came first? Meanwhile, we have limited resources. I want cameras because Afande Kawesi was killed. I need cameras now. First fix the cameras. So I think that one needs to be able to contextualize all these things and say, in the legal framework, can you plan outside the bottlenecks of... We've seen debates in the past about whether procurement is a hindrance to progress. I believe that we are better off with the procurement law and with proper enforcement of procurement laws than not. That's my view. But also you have to be realistic about what goes into all these things and what is the cost. And therefore, that brings you into the question on time.
Okay. Professor Kareja, you can say that Kampala is more organized. Maybe if you walk downtown, there's more space now. You're not worried that you're going to bump into people or even step on people's merchandise. And to some people, maybe that's a good thing. But to others, people have lost their livelihoods. They have families to take care of. They have children to educate, but they cannot sell and get money like they used to because some places are no-go areas for them.
Yeah, and that's what it fits within the idea of policy activism. Policy activism is not necessarily a negative thing, but it is popularizing policies that will make the politicians popular. One. Two, that will appear as inclusive as possible, and also we will promote equity. We all know that the international agenda is leave no one behind. So if you have any development initiative, it should as much as possible have the least amongst us also uplifted. Now, when you look at urban spaces, when urban spaces are being developed, they have a lot of feeds. It's like, let's take an example of Lake Victoria. In order for you to manage Lake Victoria well, you must manage the swamps, including Lubigi. You must manage the drainage systems in Kampala. You must manage where the breweries and all those factories around, to minimize pollution and so on. So it's the same thing with Kampala City. And you know that the political dimensions that befell the Kampala metropolitan idea, having Wakiso, Mukono as one planning area, it became a very hot issue, and I think for political reasons largely, it is something that went down. Then we are now seeing the resurgence of the regional governments. We are seeing the other cities now coming up, the 9 cities that are being mentioned, and so on and so forth. So Kampala is, I don't want to use the word unfortunately, but it is an administrative capital, it is a political capital, and it is an economic capital at the same time. When you go, like, for example, to Tanzania, you'll find Dodoma, you'll find Dar es Salaam, each being dominant in one aspect of the other. When you go to Nairobi, you'll find that it is largely constructed around the local government framework and less of an agency framework. So actually, if you want Kampala to be an authority in its real sense, you have to depoliticate it. You must disempower the road mayor and his team, disempower the minister and his team, or you go back to political actors being in charge.
So what you're saying actually disenfranchise the people of Kampala?
No, no, no.
So how do you mean? Because
it's not different.
What do you mean disempower? Because that means,
you see,
must they not have an elected mayor who has political clout?
They can have a ceremonial mayor.
But that's disenfranchising the people.
If it's not necessarily disenfranchisement, but what I mean here is that either the mayor and his team are in charge, or they are not. But if you have them partially, and then you see, we have an agency is a form actually of decentralization, but which is highly centralized. Just look at other agencies. There are very few agencies where the appointment is directly by the president. In many cases, it is the board or the minister, and on recommendation of the board. But for example, now the whole authority has no role in even interviewing or participating in the hiring of the chief executive, who is the accounting officer, to execute their will. So actually, in practice, that's why the road mayor is crying for his space. He feels he doesn't have it. So and in practice, actually, if you want to call it disenfranchisement, he could be.
Can I weigh in on this point, Patrick? I want to give you 2 examples. Taking from corporate governance, think about banks. If you are on the board of Stanbic Bank, Stanbic Bank has a board of directors. This board of directors ideally reports to the shareholders. It's a public company. These are many people. They are investors. 1,000, 1 billion, $1 million, $1 million. Between the shareholders and the board of directors, on the side, you have someone called a regulator. This is Bank of Uganda. Doesn't sit in the bank, but can wake up in the morning and say, by the way, CEO, you're fired. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. The law gives them that express power. The banking sector is working because there is this regulator who reigns in everyone. At the same time, this board of directors, under which there is a management structure, and the MD is the head of this management team, knows that if the MD goes to the board and doesn't deliver on the bottom line, the MD will get fired by the board. The shareholders know that if the board does not deliver, they will replace this board entirely. You saw what happened to the Umeme situation. Hey, there is this director. Let's not even go there.
Using that example, I just want to...
Just 1 second, Patrick. There is this structure. Then go across. Example number 2. This is number 1. Number 2, look at Kenya. You have a governor who has a structure. Their devolution model, I think, is some sort of hybrid from what Uganda did with decentralization. I hope I am not wrong.
Right.
And what Kenya has done is they have said, the governor, this government here, is going to govern the issues around here, and those people are now damn powerful. But those people know that if you make a decision that pisses off the Wananchi, the Mamamboga somewhere, you saw what happened in the oil region. Was that, what was that place where the people just came and lay? They said, those oil trucks, they won't pass. Why? Because the argument is, you are saying you want to give us 5% revenue. They are saying, 10%. This isn't about the politics. This is about numbers. This is a mathematical issue. When you go where I suspect Professor Karija is taking us is to say, what are we debating? Are we debating performance and efficiency, or are we debating politics and rallies? What's the quality of the debate? What's the issue? So you either have an authority that is going to sit and say, in the law, we are going to sit down and we are going to debate the budget, we understand the numbers, and we are going to hold you accountable, i.e. a certain caliber of people, which will take you into So you are now saying that the urban poor can't be politicians. You see, whichever you slice and dice this thing, you must create a clarity that doesn't say you have 3 linear structures.
Gentlemen.
You must put one above the other, or tell them how they coexist with clarity. But as it is today, this problem will persist.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'll open the lines so that you too can be a part of this discussion. We'll be right back.
Thanks for
Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara, and my guests tonight are Mr. Robert Kirunda and Professor Jared Kareja. We're looking into the challenges facing Kampala Capital City Authority, but maybe the challenges are bigger than KCCA. Do we lack in our cabinet and leadership people who should be running government businesses like a real business and have no idea? People have no idea to run a business, and then maybe they're only politicians and their job is only to be politicians. And sometimes we get challenges because they don't have the business competence, as opposed to what we see in Kenya.
I wouldn't want to have a sweeping statement that we don't have them. I think we have actually very many Ugandans that can do good.
I'm talking about in the political class, those who are...
Can I give you some examples? Yes. I'll give you 2 examples. One, you remember when the president appointed the Honorable Maria Chiwanuka in Ministry of Finance? She came at this thing with technical expertise. Think about the Honorable Engineer Irene Moloney in energy, an engineer by training, and if you have ever been in a meeting where Honorable Moloney is talking oil, you know she knows what she's talking about.
Let me open the lines so perhaps we can get some views, ideas from Ugandans or people, residents of Kampala, what they are saying tonight. I have a caller online. Hello? Hello? Okay, I seem to be getting challenges on the, but you can get to us. The numbers are on the screen, and tell us what you think about the challenges or how Jennifer Musisi has performed the last 7 years in charge of Kampala Capital City Authority as an executive director. Now. Hello. Yes. Hello.
Oh, good evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Oh, you're talking to Dan Baonga, and I am calling in from Wakiso.
Yes, Dan, go for it, sir.
I would like to thank you all very much, the 3 of you, Mr. Kirunda and Professor, as well as Kamara. Thank you very much for the show. I think it is very insightful. I think I would like to throw in just a comment. I think Jennifer Musisi has been a very good performer given the power centers that have been created around her, especially the political wing. And also the fact that she ran out of favor of the president, and the president accused her of the fact that if she had not been, if she had not delivered her work the way she did, perhaps she would have garnered more votes in the city. I think Jennifer Musisi lost a lot of morale for her job, and that's why perhaps that factor, as well as several other factors, have led to her quitting office at the moment. But overall, I think Jennifer Musisi has done a good job. Thank you very much, Patrick Kamara, and the panel that you have.
Thank you very much, Dan, who was calling from from Wakiso. But we all know that, for example, the president or the NRM was not winning most of the very much in Kampala, apart from at one time the Honorable Muhammad Nsereko, who later had to come in, become a rebel MP of sorts, and maybe Mr. Godfrey Nyakana. Hello.
Very much in Kampala, apart from
we have a caller online, but you're creating an echo. Hello. Okay, but I don't think that could have been really true, because NRM was not popular even before Jennifer Musisi was appointed executive director. Hello.
I think that could have been really true because...
Hello?
Yes, good evening. What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Arua. I'm calling Daniel.
Yes, Daniel, you're on air, sir.
Am I talking the NTV line?
Yes, you're live on the spot. Please go for it.
Yes, please.
Let's turn the volume on his set.
Okay. I don't know. I'm always saying that if you call and your phone goes through, please turn down the volume of your TV set. If you don't do that, it will send an echo, and that will confuse you and even us here. So you can't have a healthy conversation when your volume is high. Hello?
Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Bushenyi.
Yes, Bushenyi, you're on air. Please, your name, sir.
My name is Amanya.
Yes, Amanya, tell us what you have to say tonight.
Hello.
Tell us what you have to say tonight.
I'm Gold Amanya. I think you are dealing with the flawed structure right from the start. I said you are dealing with the flawed structure from the start. You cannot have an elected mayor. You cannot have elected mayor and at the same time have an executive director.
Okay, I think you are listening to your own echo there, but you made your point that you cannot have an elected mayor and an executive director, that we are dealing with a fraud from the very start. That was Mr. Manya. Hello.
Hello.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm Bob. I'm a businessman in the city. I'm calling in the middle of the city.
All right, go for it, Bob. What do you have to say tonight?
Thank you. Hello?
Yes, go right ahead, Bob.
Yeah, but are you recording me or I'm talking straight on the line?
You are live on the spot.
But I can't hear myself on the thing. Hello?
You don't have to hear yourself. You just tell us what we are hearing you.
Yeah, but my comment... Yeah, my comment is about the city. You know, Kampala has a problem. People who could not understand. Hello?
Go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, people don't understand what the Kampala mean or the city mean. We don't need to be politicians in Kampala. Kampala has the ownership of people who are born in Kampala and businessmen in Uganda. Yeah, and the businessmen in Kampala, they are the one owning the Kampala State Council, whatever sort of thing they mean. They are changing words, but they don't know. They don't go back on the ground to know businessmen who are in Kampala. They want to own in Kampala. If you go around Kampala and understand what business is in Kampala and who owns them, people don't know that. Because when Musisi came in, he knew that he's going to change Kampala into a political place. No, it's not that way. And people who are owning Kampala. You know, there are things like Catholics. This is like a religion. Yeah, you can say Muslims, like we came in Kampala, we knew that Baganda, they are not going to be the Mufti of Uganda. Things have changed. We have a Musisi man, he's a Mufti of Uganda. We have people, we go back to Catholics, Protestants. These are other people who can be in Kampala and be on the other side of the city. You can't bring a Muganda to be a pope or the bishop of Catholics. How? You can't bring a Munyankore to come here to do what Baganda could do. No way. Yeah. So Kampala must be ruled with the people within the region.
Okay, well, we have Musisi, we have Lukwago, we have Okamia, and I suppose they are all from the region. So you should be having all the, they are from here. But though I do not buy that idea, I'm thinking it should be people with the right. Hello? Okay, I'm going to cut that line because you have left your TV set volume high, so we cannot have a good conversation with you unless you turn down the volume. I'm going to try just take one more caller, and then I'll have my panelists wrap up. Hello? Okay. What do you make of that? That this was a fraud from the start because you cannot have an ED and also have an elected mayor. That was a mania in Mushenyi.
I think that's the point we had touched on earlier on the nature of the statute. And if the last 7 years have proved anything, I think it is that the point can't be ignored anymore. And we have to go back and rethink what kind of city do we want. The interesting thing that these comments made me think about is no one is asking if, because we all seem to somehow in one way or the other agree that the problem either started or escalated with the comments of the president when he blasted Dr. Musisi about his loss of elections in Kampala. But no one is going back and saying, was the president actually right? Is this why NRM lost Kampala? Maybe that's where we should start, and which takes us to the point of how many times had NRM won before Jennifer came along? So you then realize that maybe he wasn't entirely right. The businessman may have blamed her. Did he have to agree with her, especially in the manner that he did? It may have been politically expedient, but is it going to cost us progress in the city? The answer to that might depend on who takes over next. But the real problem is you have to go back, and I think what this show has done, at least I'm glad that the professor and I agree, that to govern Kampala properly, you must start by redefining who's in charge. And you do that by going back to the constituent document, which is the statute, because what the Constitution has done by the 2011 amendment is to say, the 2010 amendment is to say, Kampala will be a special administrative area, the same way that you have Washington, D.C., London, and all the major cities in the world. But if you go back and look at the nature, and there's politics there, and so I don't agree that the idea about streamlining and saying who's in charge equals to disenfranchisement. And I think that, if you, without even going too far, if you look at Kenya, their model has its flaws, but is it working for them? Now they're starting to have a question about are governors too powerful? So every model you're going to look at is going to lead you exactly to the point of how do you set up this structure in the law that everyone agrees with.
Professor Kareja, how do you see, for example, the congestion reduced in this city? Because many are happy we built the Entebbe Express Highway, but I've been wondering, you stay in Busega, that's what you've said. I've been wondering, after people have reached Busega, what's the plan? You know, you have your top executive is coming in maybe to hear the Serena, and he flies in at Entebbe and takes Entebbe Express Highway. You reach Busega, what happens?
You go back to a small road and then...
Go back to a small road,
Yeah.
and then what? And then all the time you have saved from Entebbe to Busega, you'll have to spend it. It's lost in Busega and Kampala.
And you see, I think that was the
role. And you have a market called, is it Kaletunsi or something market? Down here, Usafi market. So what is the market doing at the entrance or exit of the city?
I don't know how far we have gone with setting up the Kampala Metropolitan Planning Authority. Actually, the Act creates an entity whose duty is to give us solutions to that. But you see, managing government affairs is complex. You'll always find competing and conflicting objectives. And we use different experiments to try to solve these problems. Now, creating KCCA as an agency, I would call it policy experimentation. And through progressive elaboration, some of the gaps have come out so clearly. So one way forward is, it may not be easy now to say that you must do A, B, C, D, but there must be clarity on the distribution of power.
Okay, our time is almost out. Mr. Robert Kirunda, what's going to be your concluding remark on the show tonight?
I mean, I like the quote that is attributed to, you quoted President Woodrow Wilson earlier. I want to quote another American president, Theodore Roosevelt, who said, the real credit belongs to the person in the ring. I am editing that from man because in this case we're talking about a woman. Because they're the ones who know the sweat, the blood, the tears, not the critical cynic who's standing on the sidelines. And he said that they will always be better than those cowards who did not try. I believe with all my heart that Jennifer Semakula Musisi has her weaknesses. I believe that she has her regrets in the way that she ran the city. But I also think it's only fair to give credit where it is due, without taking away or diminishing or even dimming the unfortunate instances. As a resident of Kampala, I am grateful for the change that I see today. And I think we should credit her for that. The second thing I'm going to conclude with is to say that I think it is really important that we go back to two discussions. The first one, and we think through this deeply and carefully. The first one is, are we happy with the nature of the legal framework in Kampala? It is a hot button issue, one that we must resolve. We've resolved far more complex issues like term limits and age limits and so on. We need to resolve this issue once and for all.
You think that was resolved?
Well, for now. For now, because, and that's an excellent question, because there's a pending appeal in the Supreme Court, and maybe the issue is sub judice. But at least the term limits were resolved. Now, we may have to come back to this point 10 years from now. But we have to, and to resolve that issue is important because we must decide what kind of city do we want. We can have a city in which anyone is free to have their way, or we can have a city that works. The point you're making that if my business executive flies in and I have to get them from Entebbe to the Serena, must I really go to the police and get what in, you know, I'm the MP for Muntuawansi. We call it wiri wiri.
You're the one, eh?
Yeah, I'm the one. Wiri wiri, you know, the police.
Yeah.
There was then the sirens became.
I'm told there's some money you can pay, everyone will get it wiri wiri.
So they say, I don't know. But you can see we got to a point where it became such an irritant because everyone somehow had figured out a way to create a right of way. We can either have that city, excuse me, or we can have one in which everyone stays in their
area. Ugandans now have a tendency, they have all these flickering lights behind their cars and in front. I don't know what that means. I don't understand.
If you ask me, it is complete midnight madness. To think that everyone, you know, the Traffic and Road Safety Act actually gives you who has the right of way. It lists them. Ambulances, Bank of Uganda, bullion vans, the president, so on. You have to decide. I'm
talking about individual cars. I've actually even
and
have
they even push you off the road.
Sirens.
And
if you don't have a siren, you have those flickering lights.
And you see, for me, that's
I don't know
not
whether you want to pimp your car or something like that.
And you see, for me, that's not really a technical problem or a political problem. It is just outright indiscipline. And you need someone who is determined enough to say, I am going to crack the indiscipline on the roads in Kampala. You will stay in your lane, you will behave, or you will pay the penalty for it. And then we take the politics out of that and we solve that problem. In Singapore, you can't spit on the street. There's a law against that. That's why the city is organized when they have the Grand Prix. They don't build a road for the Grand Prix. No, they block some of their roads. Their roads are that good for the Formula 1 Grand Prix.
Professor Jared Kareja, your parting shot.
I just want to make one quick comment on the so-called bashing of Musisi by the president and whether it was correct or not. For as long as you are managing a public agency, I think you always expect that whether falsely or in truthfulness, you'll be bashed by the politicians. And political acuity is one of the competences that is required to be in that position. And I believe that Musisi has a high level of that political acuiteness.
Professor Gerard Kareja, thank you very much. Mr. Robert Kirunda, thank you very much. We agree that Jennifer Musisi has done something good for Kampala in the last 7 years. We can see the footprint she has left is something good. If somebody is appointed into her position, maybe he or she will build on that, and perhaps they'll work together with the Lord Mayor, and we can have a better Kampala that we all deserve. In case if you are tired of Kampala and a lot of traffic jam and all this, you can try Fort Portal. It's coming up. Good night and good night.